Blizzard has announced that Mercenaries will no longer be receiving further regular content updates, which basically means that the mode is dead. Now, I don't think this is a huge surprise since Mercenaries was a flawed game mode with interest falling off immensely after the mode's initial launch. But at the same time, ceasing support for what was supposed to be a major game mode is unprecedented in Hearthstone and makes Mercenaries easily the biggest failure in the game's history. So I think today it's worth taking a look back to discuss what went wrong with Mercenaries. And I think the best place to start would be with the announcement of the game mode itself. Mercenaries was officially revealed at BlizzCon Online in 2021, and the information we got was very vague, with no gameplay even being shown. But we got buzzwords we get time and time again, like
strategic RPG gameplay
and
highly replayable roguelike missions.
And when you combine this with the beautiful Valera marquee art that went along with the reveal, this got people pretty freaking hyped. But you see, hype is only good if you can live up to it. And unfortunately for Mercenaries, the mode seemingly fell quite short of the hype once the gameplay was actually revealed months later. Not only was the gameplay announcement itself confusing and not showed nearly enough of what you'd actually be doing in Mercenaries, but it became clear that the RPG gameplay and highly replayable roguelike missions was less referencing games like Slay the Spire, which players were led to believe, and more so referencing gacha games like Raid Shadow Legends. And for those who don't know, Raid is generally seen as a game whose sole purpose is to extract money from its players. But what made matters worse was that Blizzard announced that there would be not one, not two, but 3 pre-purchase bundles with the launch of Mercenaries, despite it not even being entirely clear what players would be buying into. This only further exacerbated the comparisons to Raid Shadow Legends, and this ended up being a huge PR nightmare for Blizzard and literally overnight made the community super suspicious about Mercenaries. Suspicions that would later be confirmed once the players finally got their hands on the game mode.
Now the fun really starts.
Now, it's not enough to say that Mercenaries monetization was egregious and by far the most predatory of monetization ever introduced into Hearthstone, but beyond that, the whole game economy of Mercenaries was just ill-conceived, to the point where even something that should be simple, like the packs themselves, were surprisingly confusing because mercenary cards, their respective coins, and cosmetics were all in the same pack, and each of these things had their own rarity ascribed to them, so it wasn't really clear to players if they were getting what they were supposed to from packs. But what was really backwards about the economy was that you could spend money on the expensive packs or coin bundles in the shop, but then you would still need to spend significant time grinding PvE in the game to unlock a mercenary's abilities and equipment so you can actually use those coins to upgrade them. So Mercenaries wasn't really pay to win like a lot of people feared it would be, but rather pay to grind, which makes no sense. That's like getting a job in an Amazon warehouse and paying Jeff Bezos for the privilege of working in unsafe conditions. And yes, the PvE was so bad that I'm comparing it to working in an Amazon warehouse, but more on that later, because the lunacy does not stop there with Mercenaries' economy, because there was one more huge glaring issue with the economy that basically punished Mercenaries' most devoted supporters, and this would be the excess coin problem. Basically, once you completely maxed out a mercenary, you would have no further use for all the coins you've acquired for that specific merc, and at the time, there was no way to convert those coins of one mercenaries to another, so you would be stuck with all of these excess coins that you just couldn't use. But the crazy part about all this is that if you spent money on mercenary packs, you would still get coins for your mercenaries that were maxed out, which meant that more invested players who wanted to spend money on the mode were actually incentivized to not spend money because they would receive mostly useless coins from packs. It's funny because players thought this was like a huge oversight, but as former game director Bentley revealed, the devs just didn't expect players to consume Mercenaries content so fast.
One of the big things we wanted to make sure we delivered on as quickly as possible was what to do with your excess coins. We frankly didn't expect players to get so many so fast, and maybe that was naive and foolish.
Now, to be fair, eventually the excess coin issue was resolved a year later, albeit in a way that left players kind of desiring more, but at launch, if you wanted to rank up a certain mercenary and you were like an invested player, you essentially needed to grind PvE for an obscene amount of hours to accumulate enough coins because it was just too inefficient to get coins through opening packs or spending money. And players would do this because it allowed them to eventually experience the single best part of Mercenaries, which was the PvP. Speaking from my own experience, Mercenaries PvP at launch was some of the most fun strategic gameplay I'd experienced for a while. Due to the very little RNG in the mode at the time, the PvP felt oddly like chess. But now we circle back to the problem with all of this. The only way to experience this amazing PvP gameplay at a somewhat competitive level was to grind the PvE nonstop to max out your mercenaries, which never made sense to me as a Hearthstone player. Like if Blizzard suddenly made it so you needed to grind the heroic Knacked Adventure 20 times before you could play a meta deck in Standard, players would totally lose it. And unfortunately for mercenary players, the PvE was not nearly as engaging as the Hearthstone adventures and fell significantly short of the expectations that Blizzard themselves set for players in the build-up to the Mercenaries launch. While there technically was strategic RPG gameplay with roguelite missions, the encounters quickly devolved into use this comp that rolls everything in PvE without you needing to think. And the roguelite elements always felt relatively surface level, with treasure decisions not really mattering too much, nor like making bounty runs play out drastically different, at least to the extent that you would expect with a game that's being marketed as a roguelite game. The only real challenge with PvE would be some of the bounty bosses, but that wasn't due to like any engaging strategic reasons, but more so because you wouldn't know about a boss's game-breaking or game-altering ability until you faced them. But once you knew about a boss's ability, then the bosses themselves became pretty easy to beat as well. And so design-wise, the PvE was very unsatisfying because most of the challenge came from the purposeful withholding of boss information, which is not so much a challenge and more so a cheap gimmick to make you need to play through a bounty more than once. Now, what makes this all the more regrettable is that the devs seem to envision this PvE being Mercenaries' big draw, so it appears that a lot of resources were invested into supporting this kind of content.
The way we had thought about Mercenaries was really just a really fun, interesting single-player experience that you can play at your own pace and dip in and out. And the rate at which people consumed it was incredibly fast.
But despite the devs' best efforts, the PvE was lackluster and ultimately became an obstacle that made it challenging for players to experience the best part of Mercenaries, which is the same thing that's kept Hearthstone alive for nearly a decade, and that would be the PvP. And this begins to touch on the big reason why I think Mercenaries failed, despite it having a bunch of issues, more than I've even mentioned in this video. And yeah, sure, the monetization was very insulting to players. No free passes there, Blizzard. But anyways, I believe what truly caused Mercenaries to become Hearthstone's biggest failure is that Blizzard just misunderstood its own audience. It seems like the devs devoted a lot of resources to making Mercenaries a casual PvE-centric experience, when that's never really been what Hearthstone is about. Sure, we've gotten many wonderful PvE solo adventures in Hearthstone throughout the years, but what has kept players coming back time and time again to this game is the player versus player experience. And for Blizzard to kind of push that to the side with Mercenaries, I think really doomed the mode from the start. And so, as unfortunate as it is, I think it makes sense that Blizzard is cutting its losses with Mercenaries rather than doubling down, because the mode at its core is just too out of touch with what most Hearthstone players enjoy. But to give credit where credit is due, the devs do understand that Mercenaries has its fan base and are giving one last big content release for the mode so it can go out with a bang. I'm sure this won't be fully satisfactory for the Mercenaries community, but at the very least, it's something. I think Blizzard was stuck between a rock and a hard place with what to do with Mercenaries, and I think this gesture shows that they're trying to make the best of a bad situation. Now, with all that being said, what do you think about Mercenaries? Love it? Hate it? Don't care about it? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoy these types of videos, make sure to like and subscribe, and let me know what you guys want to hear about in the future from me. But in the meantime, stay superior. I'll catch you all next one. Later. Get that